It goes without saying that maritime planners are being confronted with an array of challenges associated with all naval recapitalization programs, not just here in Canada. But recently, Frontline magazine reported in an article titled "Recapitalization Strategy Struggling" that the Canadian National Ship Procurement Strategy, NSPS, is already experiencing delays that are impacting not just on delivery schedules, but resulting in spiraling costs, which will be compounded over the course of the decades-long strategy of implementation. They also reported that it's becoming increasingly likely that, one way or another, the Royal Canadian Navy will not be getting the ships or the capability that it thinks it's going to be getting. That assessment was echoed in the Auditor General's report on NSPS with two key findings. First, that the budgets of the individual projects were established too early in the planning process and based on rough estimates and projections, and that these budgets have not been subsequently adjusted for the changing circumstances that are now impacting on the National Ship Procurement Strategy. And the other point they made was, in the absence of increased funding, there is a risk that the number and capability of ships to be delivered will have to be decreased in order to remain within approved budgets. A gloomy picture, but this situation is not unique to Canada. Australia is experiencing a similar set of challenges. In August of this year, Jane's Defence International quoted the Australian Defence Minister in reference to the Australian air warfare destroyer as being, quote, in deep, deep trouble, calling the program a disgraceful mess, with some reports suggesting program costs have risen to 32% over budget. He went on to say the AWD will be one or 2 years late if we're lucky, and several $100 million over budget. The minister then closed off by saying that he's finding it difficult, with people not wanting to be frank about how bad the project actually is. So, while Australia is further ahead with their naval procurement plans, recently internal Canadian government reports that were publicly released by CBC and Terry Molesky suggest a similar situation might in fact be emerging here in Canada as well. In October 7th of last year, the report that was submitted by the Deputy Minister to the Minister on the status of NSPS indicated that all four parts of the NSPS are either over budget, behind schedule, or both. 3 of the 4 programs also face major challenges of a technical nature, as well as difficulties lining up skilled manpower to get the ships built. The report went on to suggest or indicate that the joint support ships are experiencing challenges in both schedule. The program is already 20% behind in time, and costs being 10% over budget. The Arctic patrol ships, the report highlighted, 3 measures that are falling behind: cost, human resources, and technical issues. And surprisingly, the surface combatants, the project hasn't even started, are also beginning to forecast challenges on all 4 measures of schedule, technical, manpower, and the procurement strategy itself. No end of challenges and issues, as well as no end of opportunities, as they say, are lying in wait in the implementation of the National Ship Procurement Strategy. And so, what are the considerations involved in moving forward with national ship procurement? Do we stick strictly with the national program? Do we begin to take a look at offshore procurement? What are the lessons to be learned and the best practices that might be available from commercial industry? Is there a possibility that perhaps the experience in the Air Force and the armies as they move towards more of a common type frame as an F-35 are now at the doorstep for navies? It's time to take a look at building a single type platform as opposed to building something indigenous for all nations around the world. So we've assembled a panel today to take a look at some of these issues. From Canada, we have Vice-Admiral Peter Cairns, who's the president of the Canadian Shipbuilding Association, as well as the director of business development for the aviation services of SPAR Aerospace. Admiral Cairns is a former commander of the Navy, and after 37 years in command of the Navy, he moved across to industry. He's a submariner by background and has commanded not only submarines but surface ships. From Australia, we have Rear Admiral Rowan Moffat. He's a surface warfare officer and specialist navigator and has had a diverse series of appointments at sea and both ashore. As a flag officer, Admiral Moffat served as the Deputy Chief of Navy, Commander of the Australia Fleet, and Deputy Chief of Joint Operations before heading up the new submarine program for 5 years. And rounding off the board, from Korea, and now with Canada's West Coast home of shipbuilding excellence, CSPAN in Vancouver, we have Mr. Harry Kim. Harry is the Director of Performance Improvement at CSPAN. He joined CSPAN in 2013 after working on several major Korean shipyards as a professional naval architecture, and he also served as the CEO of Daehan Shipbuilding in Korea. So, each of these speakers will be provided the opportunity to speak for about 12 minutes, and after that we will take a quick wrap-up and then move into a coffee break. But before we move into coffee break, I'll situate 3 or 4 strategic questions to ponder and stimulate discussions while we're out having coffee. Admiral Cairns, the podium's yours.
Thank you, sir. It's nice to know that I'm starting the Nexus. That means a hard nut to crack, actually. That's what that translates to. I'm going to talk about the Canadian experience in these programs, and this is our Canadian shipbuilding program is called the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy, and you'll hear it being, the words NSPS being tossed around rather very blithely. It's probably the biggest actual military program we have ever had in this country. It's going to come in at somewhere between 30 and 35 billion, depending on how you count. There was a decision made to pick 2 shipyards to build the government fleets. And when I'm talking about government fleets, I'm talking about the Navy and I'm talking about the Coast Guard. They will build all the government ships for the next 30 years that are in excess, or that are 1,000 tons or in excess of 1,000 tons. I take a bit of umbrage with people who say that we're really behind schedule because, you know, we started this in, the 2 shipyards were selected in October of 2010, and massive investments are actually required by the shipyards to actually get into, to be ready to actually build these ships. We had not built anything in this country for, since the late 80s to mid 90s. So it's been 15 years. We had one of the major shipyards in the country which shut down because there was no more work after they built the frigate. The investments that are required to be made by the shipyards are shown here in sort of artist renderings. The top one is CSPAN in Vancouver, and they're essentially rebuilding a considerable amount of their yard, making it compact so they can actually build ships using modern procedures. And down below, you'll see a before and after at Irving. And Irving, of course, has built considerable investment in large sheds. I believe the original intention was to build two destroyers at once, if possible, in the same shed. And that's needed in Canada, of course, because of the weather. Now, the national NSPS was something that was foisted on the Navy in the shipbuilding program by the government, and it had some very unique features, and has some very unique features. And one of them was it had a very, very interesting governance structure. As a result of that and a couple of other things which I'll mention later on the NSPS, in February of this year, the government decided to start a defense procurement system, change the defense procurement system, essentially based on a lot of the things that they liked out of the NSPS program. So the DPS is now the procurement program we work under, and it's not unusual sometimes to have changes on ships in a program, but it's very hard to have, it's very difficult to deal with changes in the program during the program. The DPS has goals to, as you see here, to provide the right equipment. That's pretty straightforward, create jobs and economic growth. And to be very candid with you, that's really what the government wanted to do. They wanted to create jobs and economic growth that would last for a foreseeable future. And their third goal was to streamline defense procurement. That, in my view, is the toughest nut for them to deal with, because streamlining defense procurement is pretty hard to know where to actually start and how actually to do it. We've never been able to streamline procurement for a various number of reasons, okay? One of them, of course, is because we don't know who's in charge of the programs a lot of the time. We have 3 government departments who are playing in the shipbuilding industry, being Industry Canada, the Department of National Defense, and Public Works and Government Services. All play in this game, all have their roles to play and their own fiefdoms, and they all bring their own issues to the table. And not only do we have to resolve issues between the government and the shipbuilder, we have to resolve issues between the various departments of the government, so it makes it doubly tough. The NSPS also incorporated a thing called the value proposition. They're very sexy in Canada now. Every major program in the future, now and in the future, will incorporate what is called a value proposition. And what is a value proposition, you ask? The value proposition is an investment made by the shipbuilder to, in fact, demonstrate to the government that what they are producing and whatever they decide is going to be the result of all their efforts, and why the country is better off after it's finished. And as I said, every major program is going to have this investment in a value proposition. We have always had industrial regional benefits in this country for as long as I can remember. We no longer have them. We now have industrial technical benefits. The change is, I think the change is going to be significant, but at this moment we don't really know how that's going to roll out from IRBs to ITBs. But these are all changes in the program that the shipbuilders now have to deal with, along with the normal building things. The government really liked the more robust governance structure in NSPS, and so they've added another layer to it to make sure it was even better. So now we have a whole group of ministers that actually are involved in it also. Now, these are some contentious issues as seen by me. They're not all of them. Some of them are major, some of them are, they're things that happen when you build ships. There's a lack of experience in the Navy in building new vessels. If you haven't built anything since 1995, you're now 20 years into a dry spell, and that actual fact allows you to lose a significant amount of capability within your shipyards when they go to other places to work. This also applies to the Coast Guard, and it applies particularly to the Public Works and Government Services, who actually administer all the contractual arrangements for the ships. So we have, not only do we have shipyards that are relatively inexperienced, we have a Navy that's relatively inexperienced monitoring these programs, and we have government bureaucrats that are relatively inexperienced monitoring programs. So, we're starting with one foot in a hole already, but I'm optimistic because I think we'll pull it out. People who work on desks in the Parliament, in the government, and the D&D are hamstrung by very, very tight controls over what they can do and what they cannot do. And you need to have some of that, but it's got to be a little more moderate in my view so that you can take some initiatives to get some jobs done that right now the system will not let you do. So, you know, it's a pretty slow, moribund, and many people say it's a constipated system. We have a difficulty in costing our programs. Kelly's just talking about, you know, we're all overspent already, perhaps. I'm not exactly sure what the budgets are for each of these programs, to be very frank with you. I know that it is difficult, but what's very difficult is that we don't cost in any sane, in my view, in a sane way. Building a ship is kind of a logical process. You have to decide what you want the damn thing to do. And when you've decided what you want it to do, then you have to write a statement of requirement. You have to get both those issues approved by the government, and then you write a specification, and then you start to build a ship. Sometimes they get a little too close together, but you should try not to do that because that's when you get into real problems. Our problem is that the costs of the ships that we are going to build was set in the Canadian Forces First Defense Strategy, CF Defense Strategy in 2006, and hasn't been changed. And we're now in 2014, coming on to 2015, and we won't see the CSC till at least probably 2020 to 25. So we're chasing a fixed target in 2006 dollars, yet we want to put modern weapon systems in it, and there's going to be it's going to clash. It has to, because it's not going to work the way I think it should, just by virtue of the fact we don't have financial flexibility. We should have a system whereby we can update our financial requirements. As things get approved by government, we have to then put in better costing. Okay, we have to give them better costing so they get approved. So we get an actual far more significant cost. And the other problem I have is, it's just one of my personal problems, is where do I go to find out what's going on? Where do I go to meet the boss? Okay, any of you who deal with government, do you know where you go to meet the boss? It's a Hydra's monster here, okay, in Canada, because I just think that the system is just not smooth, it's just not thought through, and there's nobody whose responsibility it is to make decisions when you need them made. They all have to be done by committee, and that slows the whole process down. There's questions about whether we should build in Canada. Kelly brought them up. I, for one, think it's a good decision, because one of the roles of the NSPS is actually to build technical capability and industrial capability within the country. So if you build them in Canada, to me, it's the only thing that really makes sense to meet some of these requirements. Building offshore, if you're going to do the whole thing, send your requirement out to country X and they build it for you. You're really not going to take the economic benefits of that build and also the in-service support of that build through its lifetime. The majority of it's going to go somewhere else and not necessarily back into Canada. Nothing wrong with that, except that the guidance is to build the Canadian industry. There is always, the naysayers always say that we have a significant premium for building ships in Canada. I will. Okay. So, if you can see these are our graphs from the Canadian Patrol Frigate, which in fact compared the Canadian Patrol Frigate in sail-away costs to 6 or 7 other ships. The Canadian Patrol Frigate, with the exception, was a little more expensive, with the exception of one. Depends on what your difference is, what you think of it. That there is But I don't think the premium is significant. If you take that one step further and look at this, when they compared the Canadian Patrol Frigate to a whole series of other frigates of the same sort of vintage, all the green are area where the Canadian Patrol Frigate was superior. And the grays are, dark grays are equal to, and the light grays are inferior to. So in actual fact, when you build in Canada and you finally get it organized, you actually can build a pretty good ship. We've gone through this before, and that's not to say that we should take that as we will always pull it off, but we have done it before. What it really means to me is that we don't need to do it again. We shouldn't do it again, okay? Each time we do it, it's more difficult than the last, and it will be this time too, but I am very optimistic that we'll be able to pull it off. Thank you.